on the call today. My name is AJ Kamish. I'm an account executive over here at TaskRay. I'm excited to go through this webinar with you and kind of give you a glimpse into what TaskRay can do. Of course, as with any webinar, we won't cover quite everything that is possible today, but I'm excited to kind of show you at least an idea of what you can do with the product. So with that said, one thing that I'd love to do first is just do a little bit of background, right? Some context setting and foundation laying. So TaskRay might be a little bit unfamiliar for some of you. It is 100% native to Salesforce, so it lives alongside all of your customer and other data. We are about 10 years old. We're 5-star rated in the App Exchange, and we've evolved a lot during that time. So kind of at the beginning of our journey, we were specifically like an agile project management tool. And then we started to identify that where our customers really needed us to focus was on repeatable business processes. That's where there was a lot of opportunity for improvement. And so we started to focus on that. And then ultimately where we are now is we realized that the post-sale process, so anything that you need to do after you have a new customer sign on, is really where we excel and where we offer the most value. And so customer onboarding has really become our focus. So in order to allow us to really hone in and help drive greater efficiencies in implementations and delivery for our customers, we really focus on the fact that we live in Salesforce, right? So that you can report on all the different elements involved in your use case. You can build automations to streamline those workflows. And just overall, one of the themes that you'll see today is that we're really big on just taking advantage of all the power that comes with being native to the Salesforce platform. So one thing I do want to touch on here too is just the idea of customer onboarding and customer success, right? So we've established that TaskRay is in fact an onboarding tool, and you see that verbiage all over our website, and you've probably even heard that term coming up more and more recently in your industry. So the question becomes, why? Why is onboarding so important? Why is everyone talking about it? And we've learned that a closed deal isn't exactly where the cycle stops with a customer, right? If it were, things like churn, second order revenue, expansion, none of that would exist. The end of the sales cycle or a purchase or procurement, we all know at this point is really just the beginning of the customer lifecycle. And we believe here at TaskRay that the first 30, 60, 90 days are a very, very important transition that will materially impact your relationship with each of your customers further down the road, and something that should be focused on. So with this slide, I'd just like to point out, like, this is not only important because we want our customers, of course, to have a great experience, but ultimately because their experience will also influence our bottom line as an organization with regard to customer referrals, expansion opportunities, churn, like we mentioned before. So I just like to highlight real quickly that this isn't just a matter of keeping the customer happy, which it is, but it also really impacts the performance of the business. So what it comes down to is if you were going to invest in this part of the customer journey, where would it be? So I like this slide a lot. It offers a great visual on how much we tend to invest in specific areas of our business related to the customer and how onboarding kind of fits into that puzzle. So often, this bottom right corner is forgotten, and we invest heavily in things like marketing and lead generation, and then we have the sales process itself and maybe some quoting tools, et cetera. Then the customer signs and somehow maybe they go to a customer success oriented platform. This might not exist either, but what I like to highlight here is that there's 2 transitions that need to happen for every customer once they make a purchase with your organization. And that is how you get them up and running and get your product delivered, and then also how you transition them to something a little bit more long-term to ensure their success. So if you were going to try to plug something in here, what would it be, right? So that's where we come in. And TaskRay is specifically designed to handle this process and kind of build a much more holistic ecosystem in how you use your Salesforce environment. We're often making those investments in the first touch points of customers, so it only makes sense to kind of round it out. All right, so what I'm going to do now is jump into the demo. And again, as Rakesh mentioned, if any questions come up at all, don't hesitate, throw those in the chat. We'll definitely try to save some time at the end to touch on those and answer them for you. Okay. So I'm going to start on an opportunity. So what I'm going to do today is to try to walk through TaskRay and see how it can help you smooth out the onboarding process of your new customers. And one thing I'd like to note is, we say onboarding, every organization, depending on what you deliver, you might call it implementation, you might call it delivery, you might call it execution, or even just project management. But anything that occurs after the sale is what I'm alluding to here. But what I'm going to try to do with this demo is actually follow a practical narrative that should loosely fit the process that many of you on the call today use. And so that way we can see what TaskRay looks like when you're actually using it in a realistic way, rather than just showcasing our wares, right? So what I'd like you to do is just imagine we're putting on our salesperson hat. This is where you've been living on the opportunity, right? And likely, you know, as a salesperson working this deal with Capterra software, they've got a few products that they're purchasing from our organization. We've got those listed here. Throughout that cycle, you've got to imagine that the salesperson has learned quite a bit, right? And what their desires are, those useful pieces of information that we want to try to capture so that we can relay it to the teams that will be taking over once this prospect signs on. And that's what we have over here is this onboarding information. And we just have 2 fields here, and these are just examples. This is just Salesforce. This is entirely customizable. But what we really encourage customers to do, and we see a lot of our customers find a lot of success doing, a popular method, is they'll have deal handoff notes and desired outcomes. So this is, of course, why is the customer purchasing your product? This is the why behind their purchase. And the deal handoff notes are a little bit more internal context, right? Things that the next team in the process might need to know. Things about vacations coming up, or individuals that are really useful to work with, or any barriers that you see kind of down the road that you want to anticipate. So this is important because we, of course, don't want to drop the ball, but also we want to prevent the customer from feeling like they weren't really heard the first time. So we've tied that into the product here. And there's a couple ways that you can kick off an onboarding process in TaskRay. And we're going to talk about just 2 of them today, but they're both really popular and provide a kind of a different approach depending on what your priorities and business processes are. So the first one that I want to look at is for situations where your customer is taken through about the same process. You know what the project is going to look like. You've created a template or maybe a few variations depending on something like customer size, industry, or geography, like where they're located, et cetera. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a simple automation. So I'm going to say, as a salesperson, we just closed won this deal. So I'm going to mark this stage as complete. And we've got a guide on how to create this. So just note that you can walk through a process that we've got step-by-step for you to create this, and it's not terribly complex. But we've created this new field that says closed won -onboarding. So when I select that, as a salesperson, with 2 clicks, closed out this deal, I've just kicked off an onboarding project. The right people were assigned to the right tasks, and everything is already set in motion. There's no way that I could close this deal without us getting everything moving, and without us dropping the ball, right? So that's one way to prevent it here, and this is really popular for a lot of our customers. The next option would be ideal for situations where maybe it's a little bit more sophisticated or complex, right? Maybe the onboarding project that needs to be created is a bit more dynamic and tailor-made for each customer. So you can cater to what that individual's customer's purchase details include. So I'm going to take you through that, and it's actually going to do the same thing that we just did with that simple automation, but it's going to take us through a screen flow so that you can see what's occurring in the background and get a better handle on everything that's going into it. So one thing I do want to point out is these products that I already pointed out at the beginning. So just keep these in mind. These are what were attached to this opportunity. And what I'm going to do is click this Kickoff Onboarding Project screen flow. And again, this is out of the box. You can kind of plug and play this, and we can give you a guide on how to set this up. Okay, so as I start this screen flow, you're going to notice the first thing is those onboarding information is going to be here, and you're going to have an opportunity to maybe add some last minute comment or something that you remembered or wanted to change. But these are going to be mapped over to the project itself. And that's key because we've learned a lot at TaskRay about user interface and workflows. And we know that putting the information that somebody needs where they're working adds a lot to efficiencies. So we're going to map that over to the project so they don't necessarily have to come back to this opportunity to find it. So here we have a kind of a fork in the road. If I said, yeah, I want to clone a project from a single template, this would essentially be what happened when I kicked off that automation just by changing the status of this opportunity, right? When I closed won it, what I'm going to do is say, let's stitch it together. Let's create a project dynamically from different groups of tasks. You can kind of think of those as, building blocks rather than saying, yep, I want to make this project that is end to end based off this template. You say, no, let's evaluate some criteria on this opportunity and have this project created out of different pieces. So if I go through this, we have already tied the Epic Payroll task group. So maybe when Epic Payroll is sold, you know that these 10 things need to happen and these people need to own them. And this is what that kind of subset of a project looks like. And you can relate them to each other very easily so that when this product is on the opportunity and you go through this, what we call Stitcher, it will know to bring in this exact task group. And the same with the other products as well. So from here, you have the opportunity to say, yep, I want these to start right away. I want to set a milestone. I want to set these up so that they at least are finished by the end of November. You can make those distinctions here. And when I click Create Project, we're going to go to the next stage in our onboarding flow here, where we're going to have the opportunity to check out who's going to be involved. And so just like those task groups that we were able to relate to that product, we can also do the same with queues so that we can have teams assigned to the tasks and then set up whatever business processes make sense for us to get those over to individuals once that project is kicked off. So for example, we have the ERP consultant team, we have the e-signature consultant team. And again, from here, if you'd like, you can dynamically reassign tasks or bring in a new team or add a new queue or bring in a new business user. If this is, maybe Maggie is keeping close tabs on this one, so we want her to be an individual that's also on this project. Okay, so now we've actually created the project, and this is giving us kind of a snapshot of what it looks like so that we can make sure everything looks right. So this is our project, estimated beginning and end dates, start to finish, with the different task groups for each of those products. And each of those task groups has a couple milestones in it so that we can make sure that we're staying on track. We've got some naming conventions, we've got the owner, etc. Okay, and when I click next here, it's actually going to bring me into TaskRay. So now we're being brought into the actual TaskRay user interface. And up to this point, we've been interacting with TaskRay out in the familiar corners of our Salesforce environment, right? When we were kind of had our salesperson hat on. So one thing I want to do first is run you through a quick layout tour. So I think this is really helpful because TaskRay being a full suite project management solution does have a lot going on, and it can be intimidating if you've never seen it before, just like any, capable tool. So I would like to break it down and just focus your attention briefly to give us a good lay of the land. The first thing I want to highlight is over on the left, and this is our board filters, right? So when you have a project or group of projects or tasks in mind that you want to interact with, you would probably start by selecting a filter. A really broad one would be My Projects, right? So this would show any projects that you own, but you can customize these based off of any fields, any criteria in Salesforce, because again, we're native, and so those projects are just custom objects. So you can make a filter that says, show me all of Rakesh's projects that are slated to finish in the next month and are for accounts that are greater than $100,000. So you can get as granular as you'd like here. Once you select a filter, whatever projects meet that criteria, in this example, any projects that I own will show up down here with a little checkbox next to them. Then you can go through and start checking boxes to say, okay, I want that project to show up on the board for me to interact with. So for example, if I say My Projects, but then I leave all of these unchecked, nothing's going to show up over here. So if I check the big tech solutions or all of them, I'll start to have those projects showing up. The next thing I want to point out is just the task structure. So up here in blue, that's the name of a project. Then this phase one, this is what we call a task group. And these are totally optional, but a lot of times our customers will find that organizing a hierarchy or structure to their projects is really useful. So phase one is just a name. You could name this introductions or implementation or phase one, however you want to break that out. And then under each task group, you have a list of tasks. And these are the tasks themselves. You'll notice that this has a diamond next to it. That's because we've marked it as a milestone, which we'll get into a little bit later. And of course, who's assigned to that task right next to it. This is the board. So this is effectively where you're engaging with a project. So from here, this is one of our many views. This is essentially a Gantt chart, so it might be pretty familiar to a lot of you. And then over here on the far right is just the users. So if you remember when we kicked off this project and we selected the teams and individuals that would be involved, When we've selected a project, the only users that'll show up over here are teams or individuals that are involved in this project. So you won't get cluttered with all 200 users all there at the same time. It's gonna be intelligent enough to recognize who should be relevant for this project. And then the last thing I want to point out is up on the top left here, we have several different views that you can work in within TaskRay, depending on what your goals are, what your focus or emphasis is. There is the My Work tab. There is the All Work tab, which actually has 4 views within it. And then there's the Performance tab, which has 2 views within it. And we'll touch on all of those today. Okay. So now we've got a bit of a lay of the land. We're back into TaskRay. It's a little bit more familiar. What I want to do is, now that we've got an idea, is to actually manage a project and kind of touch on some of the pieces that make TaskRay so useful for folks who are actually interacting with these projects. And we all wish projects were linear and predictable, of course, but they're not. So one thing that TaskRay does a really good job of that I want to point out first is helping to assist your teams in managing that chaos, right? Because you're probably not working with one project at a time. It's probably quite a few, and things get complicated and things occur downstream out of your field of vision. And so one thing that TaskRay does a really great job of is help to maintain visibility into changes and even give a heads up when it's necessary. Maybe there's a problem occurring downstream in one of the projects. That moment when you realize, oh man, I wish someone would have spotted this last week. Well, our product team has put a lot of thought into that and how TaskRay can have your back in those situations. So one example that I'd like to point out. So these arrows are dependencies, right? And if this task were to get bumped out, everything that's dependent on it is going to go with it. I think that might be pretty familiar for many of you. But one thing that I think is really cool, if I double click into this task, it's going to have a modal view filled with fields. These, of course, are customizable. If this field isn't important, but there's a different field that is, you can add or remove fields to make sure that exactly what you need is there and nothing more. But what I want to do here is actually mark this as locked. So if I lock the date, that just says, okay, the dates that this task is set for, they can't change. We've agreed upon with the customer, or maybe it's dependent on some other third party. So we need to lock it. And you can see this little padlock icon. So then, as you can imagine, if something gets pushed out, even though it's dependent, it's not going to go with it. And why this is important is if I push that out, this dependency is now going to turn bright red. And not only does it visually show you, hey, it's red, that's a problem, right? It's also going to show up in different parts of TaskRay that I'll point out as we go. A lot of times what people will do is lock these milestones, right? Some of these dates that are kind of agreed upon as far as making progress at the right time. Similarly to clicking over here, you can also click over here on the task and open up that same modal view. So this is going to have, the details. You're also going to be able to use chatter. You're going to be able to mention some of your colleagues, bring in the right people, have robust conversations in the context of this task. You can also do this exact same thing on the project as a whole. So you could have a kind of broader conversation going for the project, or if there's, a roadblock that's come up or a question for this particular task, you can use chatter here as well. You can upload files or attach a shared drive type link. And you can even add checklists. So there is one extra layer deeper than a task, and that's going to be the checklist item. So you can insert a template. I'll do that just to kind of speed things along here. And this is just going to be, are they done or not? They don't necessarily have time durations as far as days that they take, but it just gives you one more step of granularity. And then the last thing I'll touch on here is going to be logging time. So you can log time and you can say this took 2 hours. Your admin can configure different types of time if you do want to get more granular there, or whether market is billable or non-billable, and add notes. You can also log time via a stopwatch function. Okay, so now I'm going to point out some of these other views and I'll kind of quickly move through these. This was our plan view. That's the Gantt chart we were just working on. We also have a Kanban board so you can work with your tasks, just like sticky notes on a whiteboard, of course. This is going to be familiar for many of you. I think this is a kind of a comfortable view for folks who are working in some type of agile environments. The focus here, of course, is on tasks and their status. Another view is going to be our calendar view. This is really great if the timeline or the dates themselves are really important. even in all of these views, the dependencies are still in play. So if I move this and say this task actually has to happen next week, anything that might be dependent on it is going to shift, just like it did on that Gantt chart view. And you can still complete tasks from this view just by checking these boxes. Okay, so one thing I want to point out, you don't have to look at all of your projects at the same time, right? So I have just the one project right now, but if I said, actually, I want to look at our whole portfolio of customer onboarding projects, I could select all of these and get them all on one calendar. So remember the power of these board filters in all of these different views. All right, the last view that I want to touch on as far as doing work is the My Work view. So this is essentially a focused view for the individual. Due dates, stages, detail that the individual cares about. So this is a really great view for somebody who doesn't have responsibilities or doesn't have many responsibilities outside of the work that they are assigned. So they can come in here and chronologically ordered, see, okay, what do I have due today? And from here, they can see the task, the account or the project that it's part of, post to chatter, log time against it, change the due date, and all of these can be, of course, locked down or opened up with permissions. They can complete the task. They can mark something as blocked, which is essentially them raising their hand saying, I'm trying to complete this, but there's this thing holding me back. You can change the stage just like they could on the Kanban board by just selecting rather than dragging between those columns. And it'll give them some notifications like, hey, that task that you wanted to do, but it had a dependent task that you were waiting on being finished before you could work on yours, otherwise known as a predecessor, it just got done. So go ahead and get your work going. So this is really great. And we've actually also turned this entire view into a Lightning component. So you can drop this on the account record, the opportunity, the home page, and we'll touch a little bit more on that in a moment. All right, so let's actually touch on that right now. So if I go to the home page here, TaskRay being capable of full suite project management can have a lot going on, and that's not necessarily necessary to expose all of that user interface to any given user, depending on what their role is. So what we want to do is bring the exact amount of TaskRay to a user so that they can do their job as effectively as possible without being overwhelmed by pieces that aren't relevant to their role. And a great way to do that is to exclude views. So you can lock it down and say they can only see the Kanban view. Another way to do that is with Lightning components. And that's what I'm going to show really briefly here on the home page. This is just 3 Lightning components. There's about 15 of them that come with TaskRay, but this does a good job of showing that they can be things like this My Work. So you can have this where you can actually complete your tasks and kind of have that focused view for the individual, and it's all contextual. It's only showing me things that I own. You can use TaskRay feed if maybe some collaboration and conversation is more important, where you want to be able to see you just came back from a week of vacation and you want to see what all the chatter posts aggregated for all the tasks and projects that you're following or own all in one spot. Or maybe you're managing more of a portfolio and you want to see how your team's doing and you want to select a filter here, show me all my projects, and then let's open this one up and see how everything's going. Well, it looks like that phase 2 is a little overdue, so maybe I should check in on that. Could have something to do with this block task. And here, same deal. Okay. So now that we've gone through some of the like getting work done views, I do want to touch on our performance tab because this is extremely valuable. When you come into this performance tab, like I mentioned, there's 2 views in there. There's the portfolio view, which is what we're on right now. This portfolio view allows you to select any of those from those filters that you've already created. So show me all of my, let's look at just customer onboarding projects. Then from here, you can drop these down and see more detail or just get status. If you need to change the columns that are here, maybe completed, you don't care much about that. But the cost, you care a ton about that. So let's actually put that up by the start or the project name. So just like that, you can actually tailor this so that you can get the relevant information for a meeting that you're about to walk into up on the screen and really drive conversation. And you can dive into more detail if you'd like as well. One thing I like to highlight here is let's check all of these, and then let's go ahead and open this Insights tab over on the right where that green or that red 7 is. This is part of what I was mentioning with TaskRay, doing the work behind the scenes to give you a heads up and kind of have your back. Do you remember that schedule conflict that I created in the Capitera project? That's actually showing up here. as well as any block tasks and some of the just general information as far as how the milestones are trending, anything that might be overdue. And I have all of these projects selected right now, so of course there's a lot of information here. And you can also get an idea of how those tasks are distributed amongst team members or groups. So this is your best friend. This kind of helps you know that there's a fire coming and you need to get ready to put it out. Or maybe peace of mind that there isn't. Okay, so then the last view that I want to touch on is this template performance view. And this has probably been around for about 1.5 years now. And in my opinion, one of the biggest value adds that we've added to the product in my time at TaskRay. So if I select any one of the templates that we've already created, and let's say this customer onboarding template, we've been using it for a while. We've used this template for 4 projects, 2 of them are done, 2 are in flight still. The template itself, the timeline for it, start to finish, we think that this project takes 32 days. However, the projects that we've actually cloned from the template in reality are taking 34 days to finish. Now that's not terribly scary, but let's say the template, we think it takes 30 days and the projects based off of it are usually taking 50. That might be worth diving into and trying to figure out what's going on. And we've done that for you as well. So if I click on any of these links, blocked, overdue, and completed ahead of schedule tasks. And this is just looking at that one template still, but it gives me an idea of, hey, if I go to overdue, it'll stack rank these. So if there's one that was overdue 5 times, it'll be at the top, and I can drop this down and see which projects that occurred in. But this is literally how you can identify bottlenecks, staffing resources that you need to reallocate, maybe inaccuracies in the project. So maybe you thought that this task takes 5 days, but it actually takes 3. Most people are getting it done faster, or vice versa. You think this task takes 3 days, but it takes 10. Then you can change that template and improve it over time to make it more reflective of what the actual tendency of that task is. And one thing I want to just tease here, I know we're coming up on time, is reports and something that we call flux capacity. So I'm going to come into a report here and just give you an idea that, since we're native to Salesforce, you can use reports just like you would for anything else and report on TaskRay projects and tasks, which of course opens up the doors of possibility. But the other thing that I want to mention is you can take that 50 steps further by adding resource management functionality via flux capacity. So flux capacity is something that has joined the TaskRay team recently and swings the door wide open on resource management for tracking things like actual utilization, forecasted utilization. You can make intelligent project and task assignment decisions, and even gain insight into the work that is coming down the pipeline that's in your sales cycle right now, so that you know when it's time to hire and grow your team so that you can meet future demand. So I'm not going to go into any depth here, as you've likely joined us for our recent resource management webinar, but just wanted to make sure to give a nod to these capabilities and what's possible if resource management is on your mind. You absolutely can do robust resource management within TaskRay. So Rakesh, I have a couple other things that I could certainly go over, but I want to be respectful of time. I know we're at 11:30 here Central Time.
Yep, you can go.
Great. So one other thing that I know is really popular, so I'd love to highlight and touch on, is what we call external sharing. So if I come back into TaskRay, and if you imagine you are a project manager, onboarding specialist, whatever role you think would be working with a project, maybe the best practice, and we've seen this all the time, maybe a best practice is to be able to collaborate or at least share that with your customer in a way that they can feel in the know and also be able to just work with you and avoid some questions, right? Like if the customer has access to the project that you're working in a meaningful way, maybe they don't email you every 2 days asking what the next step is or what the status is. So what we do with that is we use a Salesforce public site. So if I double click on the project, just like I did on the tasks, you'll get this same modal view. I'm just going to check this box that says, yep, this is available for external sharing. And it'll generate this URL. Now, if I click on this URL, this is exactly what anyone that you send this URL to would see. They don't have to have a Salesforce license. They don't have to be in TaskRay or anything like that. This is a public site. What's cool about this is it gives them a lot of information, and you can also lock information down. So maybe this introduce account manager task shouldn't show up here. That's a check of a box to make sure that it doesn't show up on this view, but it does back in TaskRay. It allows your customer to see, okay, this is done, this is done, this is done. Okay, the next thing that needs to happen is this. And this just helps to, if this is maybe their task, it helps to kind of light a fire under them so that they know, oh, if I don't get this done, that next thing that's dependent on it isn't going to happen either. So maybe I should prioritize this. Or maybe it just answers a question for them so they know where you're at in the process and just gives them peace of mind while engaging them as a partner. And this is always up to date. So if I come back into TaskRay here and I say, you know what, let's actually, let's move this out. Let's move this out. So those dates changed. Let's come back in here. If they open that link a moment later or refresh their page, they'll see those changes made. So every time you make a change to the timeline, you don't necessarily have to relay that information to the customer. You could just go ahead and get this link to them early on, and they can know that it's always going to be up to date. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to touch on is just our support site. I think that this is a huge piece of TaskRay's value. Let's see if I can get a new tab here. So if I go to taskray.com and go to the support in the upper right, our support team has done an awesome job of putting together a knowledge base that is extremely user-friendly and very robust. So if I come into our TaskRay guide here, and this is all public facing, you don't have to be a customer to access this. So if you want to play around in here, you can. But let's go to any one of these topics. So this is our support site, and over on the left are categories. As you drop these down, individual articles will open up. And as you can see, just by dropping down a few of these, there are a lot of articles. So maybe you want to add custom fields to projects and tasks. And this might be something your admin knows how to do inherently, but if not, or if you have a newer team or somebody who's working multiple responsibilities, it's just really great to have something that is step-by-step, calls out that you're going to need some admin permissions for this kind of thing, gives you some screenshots and walks you through it in a really professional, helpful way. Maybe it's something a little bit more complex, right? And you're going to have those in here as well, or the basic stuff. You can have this for end users as well so that they can get an idea of how do projects, tasks, task groups, how do they all fit together? So I always like to give a shout out to this because I think empowering you with this information ultimately is a big piece of what makes our customers successful. All right, and with that, that's all I have, Rakesh. I think for today, that's a great